Hello everyone, welcome to the Dreamy Lighthouse Paint and Sip live stream. So if you guys wanted to make sure that you have all of your supplies pulled out and on the table laid out in front of you, or if you're just here to watch, thank you so much for joining us today, and we cannot wait to paint with you. We'll get started in just a second. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and switch the camera to the table so I can show you my supplies real quick. So for my brushes, I have them on my paper towel over here. And my brushes that I have for this paint today, it is okay if you do not have anything similar, that is totally fine. But I've got a foam brush for kind of the background, large areas to fill in. And then I have a fan brush that's gonna be really fun to play around with for textures and getting kind of loose brush strokes as we go off and do like little clouds and different layering, and the water's gonna look really pretty because we can pull through it and create a really feathered look. So that's gonna be fun to play around with. And then for details, I've just got this kind of medium-sized brush and then a pointed brush for the detail work, the final touches. And then for my colors, I have white and black, of course, and then I've got just kind of primary red and a phthalo blue, and then my yellow is more towards the cadmium orange shade. So it's a little bit of a warmer yellow, but any yellow will do. And then of course I've got my stretched canvas here. This is 11 by 14 canvas, and then I've got a water cup that I can clean all my brushes out and store them in while I'm working. So for this guy, what's really fun about this painting is that it's a really building up of texture, and it's not just one layer for everything. I get to build up layers and kind of change things and add texture just with, again, the building of layers. So this is a really fun one to work on, but keep in mind, we're gonna be building up layers, so things are gonna have to dry between those layers, and I will put a kind of a blow dry break screen up on camera when we go between those things, and that's a good place for you guys to pause, or just pause whenever you need to throughout the whole process. I'll blow dry off camera, but again, if you guys are following along in real time, just pause and get back to it when you can. So we're gonna just kind of dive in with getting the fundamental layers, just kind of the basic messy stuff out of the way that's gonna build the structure of the painting, give a foundation, and then we'll refine everything on top of that. So my first color, I'm gonna go ahead and mix with my foam brush, and this is going to be my beach. The yellow that's gonna come in on the side, and eventually I'm gonna do 2 layers to this beach. And then this will get kind of the structure in for the painting, and then while that's drying, we'll be able to get the sky and the water in those blues. Really the final thing that we're gonna be doing is painting the lighthouse. We're gonna kind of pretend like that doesn't exist for a long time, just get a nice beach scene in. And I'm gonna start again with my foam brush. I wanna get that wet in my water and then squeeze off any extra water out of there, just so it's not dripping wet. And then I'm gonna go ahead and mix my beach color. This first shade doesn't have to be perfect. It's gonna be my darker shade, and it's going to kind of be an ugly brown color to begin with, but it's gonna be perfect for a golden brown or golden kind of sands. But the first color has to be this kind of pooey brown first, and then I'll be a perfect foundation for that. So to make brown, what you're gonna do is make an orange first. So I'm gonna divide some of my yellow away, put it in a clean part of my palette, and then grab a tiny bit of red, and that turns it into an orange. We're gonna go ahead and darken that just a little bit. And then you can add either black or blue to make it brown. I'm gonna take a tiny bit of black. We're gonna see what that does. And you can see how far that black goes really fast. So I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off my brush real quick, and I'm just gonna pull in more of those colors. We needed more of them anyway. So more yellow than red, and barely a touch of black or blue will make you brown. And you can kind of change the tone of the brown to whatever you want. This is really just the foundation though for the beach. So make it a grody, gross color and you'll be there. So let's go ahead and sketch out where we want the beach to be. So I'm gonna find halfway on the left-hand side, give myself a little tick mark. And then I wanna go in about 3 fingers at least. You can give yourself another little tick mark. These are just basic. We can paint over anything that we decide we want different about it. But then down to the bottom, I wanna go about 2 fingers in. My water will come down along this line. But for right now, we can go ahead and you can just kind of sketch out your water. We can change this, but it just gives us a little bit more room to work when we're ready to paint that water. And then very simply, let's get that color in there. be messy with it, that texture will bleed through and give our sandy beaches an even more painterly and realistic look. So just kind of make a mess of it. For any of these, you are more than welcome to, of course, pause and get a second layer of color on, but we will be painting our second layer, kind of the highlights on top of all these. For the clouds, it'll be the darker clouds in front, and for the sand, we'll be painting the highlights on top. I'm gonna go ahead and just darken up my brown a little bit, quite a bit, because that black is just scary, isn't it? So if you have too much of one color, don't try to keep mixing into that same color to try to save that. It's well ruined over there. So what we want to do is kind of just divide out a corner of it and make that work rather than trying to get the ruined center, because you'll just be adding paint and more paint to try to fix that. So just grab a corner of it, divide it out, and you can change your color. What I want to do is I want to visit the kind of the top and the edges. And with this, what you can do with a foam brush is you can kind of bounce and kind of squeeze out some color without having to brush it. Actually, you can bounce it out, and we're looking for all of that texture. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna visit kind of the edges over here. The rougher it looks, the better. You can even pick up some pure red by itself, let that bleed through. And I promise the next layer, this is gonna look like you really meant for that mess to happen. Okay. That looks whack. Let's finish with the water now. So we want to clean out this foam brush completely, 100%, because we do not want any of these colors bleeding through. I do not have a sink with me up here, so I'm going to switch to another brush. It's not camera trickery. I just don't have a sink upstairs. So what you'll want to do is take your foam brush to your sink and just give it a quick squeeze out like you would any sponge. I'm going to switch to my other one. So if you guys need a pause, don't worry. I'll still be here. But if you feel like you've got enough water in your cup, you can just submerge it and squeeze it out a few times. You just want to try to get all of the black out of there is the most important part. So if you need to clean it a couple of times, just go for it. That is absolutely fine. So we're going to ignore the ugly down here, and we're going to paint some pretty blues in the sky and the water. The water is, of course, the reflection of the sky, so we can want those to be matching. I want to mix a lot more color for this. So I'm going to come over to my white, and I've divided my white into two different piles, so that I have just a little bit more pure white over on the side. If you haven't done that, just scoop up and divide some of your white, and we're going to stir into a separate section of it, so we have all the room to play. Now this color, this phthalo blue, is really strong. If you purchased our kits for this, we send you, of course, all of these colors, all of these brushes, everything that you need to create this look. But if you're doing it at home, just be cautious of adding too much of that phthalo. It will tint your colors very quickly. This is the palest color of the sky. This is the base color. If you're looking at the reference photo that comes with your kit as well, then you want to just check out the color that sits behind the clouds. That is what we're doing. It's kind of a robin's egg, a little bit more turquoisey if you can't see that in the picture. It's not just the phthalo by itself. It's got a tiny bit of yellow added to it, and that creates just that kind of more aqua, warm blue, and that'll sit very beautifully behind our purplish clouds. So what I've done is mostly white, and keep in mind it dries a little bit darker as well. Mostly white, tiny bit of phthalo, and then just a touch of your yellow. You don't want to turn green, but you kind of want it to be on its way to green. So that's what creates that turquoise. So as dark as you want, though, for anything that I say here, all rules in art are meant to be broken. So if you decide you want a completely different color in your painting, just go for it. This is completely up to you. It's your art. So this is going to be the base color for the clouds. We're going to make another mess and just fill everything in. We're going to cover up a lot in the sky. We're going to cover it up with clouds in the water. We're going to cover up in waves. So this is, again, the foundation for what we'll put on top. I'll try to avoid using the word foundation for the rest until we get to the lighthouse and we paint a foundation. I guess that's today's word. Use it in conversation. All right, so what I'm going to do is paint up to the sand, but if you guys feel like it's still too wet, don't worry about trying to touch it, because you'll pull that yellow in and create that. Well, we can paint over it, but at the same time, we're gonna put waves over that anyway, so you can leave a tiny line of white and that'll save you from accidentally pulling any sand in. And again, we'll paint white over the top to actually paint waves, so that will be perfect. All right, all the way filling the rest of your canvas. While I'm down here, I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of texture in the water just to kill time. But also it's just because it'll do the work for us later. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull a little bit more blue. If you wanna stick with those aqua colors, you can do a little bit more yellow. Be cautious with that yellow. It will turn it green very quickly. It's a strong color. So I've just kind of darkened up that same pile. And we're just gonna start with the first layers of waves, but this is just gonna be the first one. We'll do a little bit more as we go. So the edge of the water is going to be about halfway up the canvas. Again, I'm going to start brushing towards the shoreline. I wanna start making my brush strokes a little bit more choppy. And then if you wanted to, you can follow the waves themselves and just kind of drag some brush marks over here. This is just layer number one, don't forget. But as I get towards the right-hand side, I'll start picking up a little bit more blue. And then in a moment, we'll add a little bit of black in there. So with my blue, I want to add just a tiny touch of black. And we'll probably do another layer of this black and everything too. So if the color gets a little grody, we'll define it later. This is just another building block, not foundation, of the colors and the texture. So very painterly painting. Painterly means you see all the brush strokes, you see the hand of the artist in that everything has not been smoothed out. Everything looks like it's been built. It's got texture, it's got grit, because you see the brush strokes, you see all of the texture in there. So that's what painterly means, is that you can actually see the artist shining through with literally every brush stroke showing. So we want to make sure that we're not over blending. So when I get in here, while it's still wet, I want to brush, kind of pounce around, and then no more touchy, which is kind of the hardest part, is not painting again and again and trying to smooth out stuff that you are getting bothered by, but you just have to trust the process that it will get covered up, it'll get incorporated, and it'll look like it belongs. But we have to get there, and we have to be patient and not overpaint it if we want to achieve that painterly look. If you love really blended stuff, just keep painting. The more you blend wet paint, the more it's going to blend in. But if you're looking for the original and you want that vibe, then just paint and then no touch. And we can always do another layer on top. So what I've done here is you can see the direction of my brush strokes off in the distance. This is actually forced perspective. This is us kind of making it feel like things are disappearing. Now that's because my brush strokes are horizontal off in the distance, and as they come towards the viewer, they start to tilt. We'll go more into this as we get the waves, so it's not, you don't have to worry about doing it very clearly at this point. That's because our disappearing point, our focal point, our, IT man, what's it called? Vanishing point. Thank you, sir. So our vanishing point is back here. So all of our lines are going to be directed to this point of the ocean. So that means if I'm coming through here, then everything should point to that line. So I'm going to start radiating out. It goes straight there, and then my brush strokes will start to radiate towards that, more or less. So that's something to keep in mind, is if you can kind of imagine a dot here, as you're going along the shoreline, things should start to kind of spin and go towards this point over here. So we'll emphasize that a little bit more once we get the waves in here and the darker colors, but this is a good starting point. So this is also the first dry break. I'm gonna give you guys a few minutes on the screen with just a little bit of a dry. Pause the video live stream and catch up as you can. I've put my brushes in my water cup. It's best to go rinse them out in the sink if you decide to use them later. We probably won't use them again. So if you're decided that you never want to use them again, you can just toss them. But they are like sponges, so you can just rinse them out in your sink and just squeeze out all the paint, and you can use them forever. They work great for applying glue to things or a thin layer of paint, whatever you need to do. So again, I'm going to put a pause screen on the camera. I'm going to blow dry mine, so I'll be quick with that. So pause if you need to, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. So I blow dried mine, so my canvas is dry for this next step. If yours is a tiny bit damp for this, it is not the end of the world. It just means your colors will mix in and blend and create new things. Even if they're accidents, let's see what happens. And it's totally chill. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix my purplish cloud color. I'm gonna use my medium-sized brush for that. And then we will use the fan brush to actually apply it, but it's really hard to get this guy on the palette and fix that in there. So what we're gonna do is use a smaller brush so accidents don't happen. So you wanna find a dry spot on your palette. This is pretty much dry right here, so I'm just gonna mix it on top right there. And we wanna start with white first. I'm gonna divide out a good portion of this. I want plenty of this color to play around with, so I'm gonna mix a good amount. And then it's gonna be mostly blue. That still means I wanna add a little bit at a time. And most importantly, I just want it to be darker than my sky color to begin with. So if you need to even hold it up and decide if it's darker or not, or mix near your other pile and decide if it's darker. So keep adding blue until it's to the shade that you want. And you can make them as dark as you want. If you want it to be Storm a Brewin' in the distance, you can make these black. You could do that if you want to. That'd be really cool and intense. Maybe gray, maybe not pure black. That'd be weird. All right, so I'm going to mix blue and white, and then I'm gonna start pulling in little tiny bits of purple. I don't know, I got choked up there. Little bits of purple or red to make it purple. And you can do as much of the blue and as much as the red as you want. If you want to just keep them in the blue shade, just go for it. But I'm gonna just add a little bit of red to make just tinted a little purpley. All right. And just to whatever percentage you want. Now you can sketch out where you want these clouds to be with the same small brush, but I'm just gonna dive in with my, I'm just not deciding what color I want on this. I'm gonna dive in with my fan brush. The first layer of the fan brush is gonna be a little bit of panic because it just is such a large brush stroke that you just kind of want to make it go away as soon as you put it on there. So what we want to do is make kind of a game plan for this. So if you look at the reference photo, we've got mostly clouds coming in from the sides and tapering as they come inward. So we're going to focus our brush strokes around the edges and the perimeter of the painting. I like to start my brush strokes there and start to slowly pull them in onto my canvas. I will go ahead and show you a couple of those brush strokes before you have to dive in. And then what I'm gonna do is put my brush right into my white to start doing the highlights while it is still wet. So when you're doing that, when you dive in, make sure you pull from the edge of the pile of your white. Just kind of dip it in there, and then that'll keep the rest of your pile clean for your next brush stroke. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pick up a little bit of this blue. You can even be pulling in other colors as you're going. It doesn't have to be consistent. That's gonna give it that painterly look again. It's just by changing things up as you go. Don't forget, this is just first layers of these things. They will dry, you can paint over them, but let's go ahead and get gutsy with it. So I'm gonna start on the edge. I'm gonna start swirling. I did not water down my brush, let's add just a little bit of that. I'm gonna start swirling my brush strokes and tapering. I'm just gonna get this biggest cloud in first. I'm gonna go along the horizon line and start tapering downwards, kind of along the horizon. And then here, I wanna sweep it across. You can see I picked up some red, and that's gonna blend in because everything is still wet. And then I wanna come over here, and these are just the first clouds, so we'll add things that make them make sense by going upwards in just a moment. But here, I'm gonna start kind of curving my brush strokes and getting them built up. See that hot mess? Let's make it beautiful. I'm going to rinse this color out. Most of the way anyway. Make sure my brush isn't too wet. And then I'm going to pull my white into my brush. And then I'm gonna start curving at the top and kind of dragging through this color. And you can push this paint, you can take the corner of your brush and kind of swirl. You can have a lot more control of this. We wanna use it to make messes though, and make that texture. Kind of forces us to get a little bit messy and loose. So I'm going to go ahead and coat it, start at the top again, and start to swirl down into my other colors. Don't forget you can use the corner of it if you want to do something a little bit more definitive. You can take that and kind of swirl out, and then start pushing the paint down into the pile, and then I kind of sweep things out. Again, this is a very painterly technique to kind of get these in really rough without giving too much definition. And I'm just gonna kind of wave my brush like this through there, and that's gonna soften any where you can see there's individual brush strokes. You can come back in with a smaller brush and kind of smooth things out. You can drag your brush through and kind of feather in some of those other colors. But let's go ahead and just get more on here and we will make it all make sense. So I've just gone in and I've kind of defined the edge of this first. I start with the dark again, and I'll just kind of start sweeping it in and taper it off. I'm actually gonna sweep my brush and let that taper. And then I'm gonna go in and define the top again. And we might come in with more of a highlight with our smaller brush later and really give the top of these clouds a little bit more definition. But this will be a good start. And it just forces you to be a little loose with everything. Not morally, just brush strokes. Just the brush strokes. And then I like to do just a little bit of kind of messy brush strokes that go across. These are kind of like stratus clouds. They're just straight back and forth. We don't have to try to define them in any way. They're their own person. You don't have to define them. And you can see my colors are they're getting really random. It's not like a well-mixed pile, and that's exactly what's gonna give us more and more texture as we go. So just let it happen. This big fan brush comes down to your palette, makes a mess of things, but maybe when it's done, we'll believe in it. All right, I'm just going back up to the top now. I'm gonna get those dark bits at the top, kind of like how I did down below. I'm gonna start sweeping it down, just kind of doing the opposite. And then let's go ahead and do highlights again. I'm gonna cut through, and you'll see what I'm following with that reference photo in the kit we sent you, or if you just look up our Dreamy Lighthouse reference, then you'll get a good idea of what I'm kind of following along with. I'm gonna take a little bit more clouds and cut here. I just wanna start pushing the paint in. And you can see how much that first layer just doesn't mean anything now. This is just the foundation. Oh my God, I used that word again. Forgive me. It's just the beginning, and then we get to put the good stuff on top. And then you can go revisit, I think, as things dry even more. You can start revisiting and putting new layers on. And in any areas that you're just think that there's no saving them, just drag your brush side to side in front, let it kind of run out of paint, and just do a little bit of like pushing and pulling of that wet paint or that's almost dry. And let's find out what happens when it starts taking colors from other areas and you just start to kind of visit it around. All right, if it feels like a hot mess, you are there, you nailed it. If you're looking for more definition, let's wait for that. It's not gonna be as good with wet paint. We can add the definition with our little brush later if you feel like you need it. So I'm just going back in and adding a little bit darker towards the roots of the clouds again. So that's just I'm just kind of pulling in some more blue and red, and I'm just kind of bouncing it at the bottom. You can see that. So now, if you want those little pieces, that's taking, like those little pieces in the background, that's just taking the corner of the brush and kind of just sweeping through. And you can just add, just like you did on purpose, kind of brush strokes. Okay, and then because we've got these colors and we don't have any in our ocean now, we have to visit the ocean. So you can take your brush and you can go to the edge and kind of pull backwards or pull along the shoreline and then kind of follow the same pattern that you had built earlier. If you didn't have a pattern, you can just invent a new one. And it's really important to get whatever colors happened up here down into the water, and once it's in both places, because obviously the water reflects the sky, so once it's in both places, then that's going to make it look really cohesive. So no matter what you did, make sure it goes elsewhere. The narrative of the painting, we've got to make sure that it all goes. All right, and this water is going to look so cute when we actually put some lines of white through it and give it a shore. Yeah, sure. But it really will once we get the whole thing defined with details, but we wanted to let it dry, so. All right, how's everyone feeling? If you are watching at home, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment. Let us know you're there. Let us know you're enjoying yourself. Ask us any questions that you want. Maybe tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this movie has reached. We also know if our neighbors are watching. All right, so I am going through and just kind of getting that darker color up towards those edges, the perimeter over here. And if you decided really early on that this fan brush is just not working for you, you don't have to use it. You use whatever tools make you happy. But I rarely use a fan brush, and so this was a good challenge. And I like being challenged every once in a while in painting. It doesn't hurt anything because you can paint over it if you don't want to keep anything. So once it is dry, you just revisit it, change it up. And today I'm learning something new. Every painting you should learn a little something new. You should feel a little challenged. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and pick up just a little bit of white just so it blends in. I'm gonna put that into my ocean just so it looks a little bit more like those clouds and it blends in with those colors before I put the pure white on top of it when it's dry. Okay, there's a point where you start to overwork it. The hardest part of painting is not painting. It is taking a pause from painting. Let the painting sit. Let it think about what it's done and then come back to it. And if I say that, it means I really need to do it myself. So I'm gonna put my fan brush in my water, fully submerge it, leave it there. I've got any brush that I'm not using in my water because it will dry out really fast if you leave it out. So we want to leave it in the water to keep it safe from drying out. So our sand is dry over here. So in order to just leave this alone for a minute, we're gonna move on to putting our second and final layer on the sand, because everything kind of sits on top of that later, including the waves and everything. So we want that to be primed and ready. So I'm gonna grab whatever your larger brush is. You can go back to your foam if you'd like to. It's gonna take me a little while to do it with this little brush, but let's just go for it. We wanna kill more time because this has a heavy layer of paint, so I've gotta kill time, so I'm gonna take my time with this medium brush. I'm gonna mix the sand color, the brighter color now. So I've got my white, I'm gonna put it nearer my yellow, and you can just do yellow and white together to whatever proportion you want. I'm going to make it a little bit more neutral, a little bit more sandy by making it, again, a shade of kind of brown and a grayish brown. And I'm gonna put a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of black in there. Now, if you are familiar with Washington beaches, you know that our sand does not come in golden yellow. Our sand comes in a very nice shade of yellowish gray. So the more gray you add, the more it's gonna look like nice sandy beaches of Washington. So up to you how much you add. This is your beach. You design this. So I'm gonna start in the center and kind of brush outwards, and I kind of want to get up to the shoreline as well. So I'm going to kind of, when I go off to the edges, I'm gonna kind of lift my brush and kind of do this scrubbing action, kind of pushing the paint, letting it go transparent in some areas. I'm kind of letting it run out of paint, let it go transparent. I'm actually gonna do some scrubbing, just a little scrubbing, loose brush strokes. And you can see all of that bleed through to the background is exactly what we're shooting for. Let that background do its job, let it come through. You're gonna pick up some pure yellow and do little pieces of that coming through. Let the background do its job. I'm gonna get all the way up to the water if I can, if it's not too wet. And then I'm just gonna start doing highlighting. I kind of let it run out when I'm getting to the edge. That's kind of why I start over on the right-hand side, is so that when my paint's really running on my brush, it's gonna run out where I want those shadows to stay, the deepest, darkest parts that I painted. It's hard in painting to kind of trust the process. I'm sure that's not just in painting, but the process of painting, those first layers that you just want to make look perfect right at the beginning. It really is a building process. It really is a patience game. Whenever I'm doing a painting, I've painted a bit in my life, and I still have to fight the sensation at the very beginning and halfway through and most of the way through as well, that there's no way I can save this painting, there's no way it's gonna work out in the end. And I have to trust the process. I have to trust that I know what I'm doing. My job here is to get you through the process. My job here is to show you what to do next so you can enjoy painting, but I know that you still have that little nagging feeling of, oh dear God, what am I doing? How do I get to the end? Is this gonna work out? So I, again, have painted for a little while and I still have trust issues. So if that's where you're at with this, or if you had a hard time believing the second layer was gonna make it all come through, it's okay. Just push through the discomfort. Let's try something new. And I promise you the process will get you there, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Hannah wants to know if you could use the fan brush on the sand.
You can absolutely use the fan brush. Oh my gosh, let's do it. I'm gonna clean it out real good though. Real good. Use the fan brush as much as you want for everything. You're so right. Thank you, Hannah. So what you can do, obviously I've got my layers kind of already built in, but I'm gonna go rough it up a little bit. Let's go with some darker. I wanna do another layer. I wanna have fun with this. So another darker, I'm gonna go with that brownie color again. Maybe not as dark, but I'll do a tiny, tiny bit of black. I'm just gonna kind of create that gross color that is this color of sand. I don't know what it is, but it's gross when it's on your palette when you put it on here. So you can take a little bit and even just like bounce it on top and then do that scrubbing. And I like to hear, I wanna hear the canvas, you know? And that's gonna push that texture and it's gonna make it happen. You know? Just make it, like, take your anger out. Do it. Cool. All right. So in the painting that we're going to finish off, why I'm not paying a lot of attention to this bottom part here, there's going to be a little sand dune with some grasses and stuff. So I'm just kind of leaving this little corner down here. And then I'm going to do a little bit more goldy at the top. Cool. Looks like you can touch it, huh? All right, so I want to go in and finish up the details up here, but I'm going to go ahead and do another dry break just so you guys can see it actually happen. It's way more entertaining if we just move on quickly. So I'm gonna go ahead and blow dry it. You guys can pause if you need to. Just a reminder, you don't have to paint at my pace, and I will be back in a second. All right, welcome back to this hot mess. Let's go ahead and make it look good finally. So we're gonna add the defining features, and kind of what I was realizing and what I've been told before is the more details that you're adding, you start with the biggest brush and you just start to downsize from there. So we've used all of our big foam brush work, we've done our big fan brush, and now it's about time to start scaling down. Let's do our medium-sized brush. And that is going to be how we start to get everything kind of cinched in, a little bit more definition to all of the pieces. So I am going to clean that out pretty thoroughly. I think I used some yellow in that a second ago. You guys were there, you remember. And I'm going to clean that out, and I'm going to add definition to the clouds. Make sure it's all dry before I put my hand, because I always plant my arm to steady myself when I start to get detail work. So you want to make sure that your canvas is dry before you start doing that, or just roll up your sleeves and you can make as much of a mess as you want. So you can start with white and start to define the edges of the clouds, and that will do a lot for the defining features. So what I like to do, not with a lot of paint, but just a little bit on the edge. You can even tint it to blue if you're not sure if you want it to be white yet. And I'm going to start and kind of imagine that you're using the corner of your brush and push these round pieces outwards. So when I say use the corner, I mean don't take your brush and try to, I don't know what words I was saying, try to draw the perfect outline. It gives you too much control and you want it to look a little bit more natural. So the best thing to do is kind of create these little circles with your brush stroke and kind of push out and imagine this corner as you're drawing. That is what you're going to use the edge to define. So I want to create little bits of fluff. I want my brush to actually kind of dry out. I'm going to start softening my paint by drying it out. And then I'm just going to darken it a little bit and create a transition-y kind of color and push these into each other. I'm just kind of creating these soft, I'm barely putting pressure on the canvas, creating these soft little circles. And if you feel like you made a little bit of a mess down at the bottom, take your finger and smudge out some of it. So I'm just kind of revisiting these areas and trying to define parts that I feel got a little too loose. That could be very different for your painting. So don't feel like you have to match every brushstroke for brushstroke. I'm just gonna go in, and mostly it's gonna be about defining the edges of the clouds, bringing those highlights back, and then take your finger and just kind of smudge out areas that got a little too tidy. And then when you want to revisit and add those bright white highlights, maybe come back when it's a little bit drier. And let those shadows maybe sit for a minute, and let's see what happens with just adding more highlights. So I'm starting at the top of the clouds. If you feel like you didn't have a top and it all got kind of muddy, you can invent them. That's where I would encourage you to take a middle color though, and not start with a bright white, because you want to create something that it's meant to sit on top of. If you lost your transition color, that is okay. Create a new one. And don't forget there was a little bit of red in those colors, so take your time, mix your colors. And if you want to bring a new color in, do it. I'm kind of bringing in more pinks and things. And don't forget, if you create a new color, you want to bring some of it down to your water. It is a reflection down there, so you want to make sure that's, again, cohesive. So do some visiting down there. And I'm just going to do a little bit more definition. What I like about the looseness of the sky is that it makes the painting look like it's got a lot of depth, because the background, because it's so loose, it gives this sense of depth by being almost out of focus. Like it feels like it's in the background because you can't make out the details, because it's not super defined, whereas our lighthouse that sits in front is going to be super defined. Now obviously we don't have the focal point in there yet, so it's a little bit hard to see that it looks like it's in the background, because it's the only thing you're focusing on right now. But it will look like that in the end. So when you're trying to fill in the larger pockets of any part of your painting, make sure your brush is damp first, and that helps the paint spread. I'm going in and trying to do that kind of roughing up brush stroke, similar to how I did down here. I want to work in transparencies, so I want to count on the background to show through. So I'm going to do a little bit of scrubbing like that in the clouds themselves. Now here is the part of the painting where it's hard to see the big picture. So this is the perfect time to step away from your painting, look at it from a distance and see if there's some areas that just don't make sense. So the farther away you get from it, the better you can see the big picture, and you can see things that maybe just aren't working, or maybe you can see, oh, that cloud, I really want to bring that forward. So take a second, back away, and don't get so caught up in those little close-up details. This, again, is painterly painting, so it's gonna look like that hot mess up close, and that's exactly what we're shooting for. So I'm just gonna do a tiny bit more highlighting, and then I really need to leave the sky alone. We can always go back to it even after our lighthouse is in, but at this point we don't even know what the lighthouse might be covering up later. So we don't want to get fixated on one part that we actually need to be able to paint out later. So I created a little bit of a stormy cloud. That's gonna look like something's a brewing back there. Let me take a little bit of that color down into my water. Kind of a little bit more of that purple didn't come down. And if you guys want to see more of these events, more of these just kind of casual Saturday painting days, we would love to hear from you. Let us know. Just any excuse we can hang out with you guys, even if it's not in person, we're there. So just let us know if you're enjoying yourself. All right, so I think I got some purple down there. We're gonna do our more dramatic horizon, dark lines, and we're actually gonna start doing that in black. So my beach is dry, so once I get this portion, kind of the darkest portion of my horizon, I'm gonna come down here and do the first layer to what's below the grasses. And then we'll see if we need another dry break just in case. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean out this brush. This is what I'll use for the next step. And the black's pretty powerful, so if there's a little bit of paint in there. So how you clean out your brush is just gently flexing the brush at the bottom of your cup. Make sure it just gets flushed all the way through there. And then when you come back to your paper towel, if your water comes out of there clear, you've got a clean brush. And again, if you need to clean it a couple times, it's totally fine. But if there is some black in there, it is, or some white, the black will overpower it. So I'm just gonna go over to my black. I don't want a ton on there because I'm gonna wanna kind of press it out and spread it out and make it a little bit looser as well. And here's where I'm gonna go ahead and define the horizon line, so that division between the sky and the water. If you can't really make it out on your painting, invent it. Not the end of the world if you need to redefine that. So I'm starting over on the left-hand side, and I just want a little bit of paint on my brush. I've got this thin line between the water and the sky, and then I'm gonna start coming down the right-hand side, and I'm gonna start kind of without much pressure, and again, without much paint, I'm gonna start kind of sweeping inward, letting it run out, just a couple brush strokes, then I'll break it up, and start my brush strokes off the edge of the canvas, and then sweep inwards, and that's gonna give it a nice framed in look, but also just give it a really good depth out there. Yes, depth to the ocean. And you can take some of these brush strokes in as far as you want to, into the water, kind of as much as you want. If you like drama, painting is the only place I like drama, then you can bring it all the way down and sweep it in. And start paying attention to those brush strokes that all need to kind of come back up to that vanishing point. Okay, so, and if you do too much, we'll just take some blue or purple and we'll paint it out. So now over to the left-hand side, I'm gonna take that line across, and we're gonna create a little bit more of a shore. And then that's going to kind of landmass that comes out here, so we need to start to thicken it. And it's gonna come down into the water just a little bit more. So I'm gonna start dipping it down. I'm not gonna do a straight horizon line now. I'm gonna come up to meet it. I'm using my brush to kind of do the same thing we did with the clouds, where I'm bumping out, and that's gonna look like kind of shrubs, or like, it'll look like, or a shoreline where it's a little bit imperfect. It's not a straight line. We wanna give it a little bit more texture. So when I go upwards though, and this is about maybe 2/3 way across the canvas, that's where I'm gonna start to grow little bits of plant life. It'll look It'll look a little bit not like that to begin with, but then once we get more of it in and once we get some highlights, it'll look like that. So I'm pretty much creating small clouds. So I'm taking the corner of my brush and kind of bouncing and swirling and kind of scrubbing it again as I get to the left of my canvas. So this should be taller now than your horizon line, and you can make it as tall as you want to. We'll put the lighthouse on top of whatever you need to, and then where the sand didn't go all the way up, I want to make sure that at least matches that, and you can take it as far down as you need to fill that in. And I just want to kind of scrub out and make it messy at the bottom. Scrubbing out means I have a really dry brush and I'm kind of swirling it and letting little bits of paint get pulled off just from the fact that my canvas has some texture, some grit, because it is woven, so it's got automatically some grit to it. While this is still wet, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe out my brush just a little bit. I'm gonna pull in a little bit of my yellow. I'm gonna do some highlighting by just pulling in some of this and bouncing it into the black. And that's just gonna create a tiny bit of difference in color, enough to make it look just like warmer. Just gonna warm up your color. It'll almost look like green because it'll mix into that black that's got a bluish hue. And it just makes a nicer thing, not just silhouette, but it's got a little definition. So I'm just kind of bouncing or sweeping this color through, and that just creates a little bit more to look at. We want that to dry before we do the lighthouse on top. So I'm just gonna wipe out some of that yellow out of my brush, get it wet again, and then I'm gonna create this little landmass dune thing that the grass is gonna sit on top of. So very similarly, I want this to go about 4 fingers up, more or less, maybe three or four. I want that to go up on the left-hand side, and then I want it to almost get to the edge over here. So wherever your sand is, give yourself about 2 or 3 fingers in. We still want to see a little bit of peeking through, and then just create a bumpy, scrubby shore dune thingy. The grasses will come above and in front of this, so the line, the definition of the shape is not going to be paramount to what you're doing. Grasses are gonna look so nice. It'll brighten it up, so if it feels a little dramatic, that is fine. It'll brighten it up with those grasses. And we can put them in front of some of this black. So I let my paint kind of run out, similarly how we had done the highlighting. We're doing it the same, kind of in reverse, where we're doing the darkest, and then we let it fade. I've got some brown down here, so I'm just letting my paint run out again, and then I'm doing that scrubbing, and that's gonna create a lot of texture. So I want to have this dry, so I'm just gonna do like a few seconds of blow dry, and I'll be back in just a second, and then we'll be able to get all of kind of the final touches in. So I'll be back in a second. All right, so my canvas is dry. So now we're gonna do our final touches, kind of hopping around our canvas and visiting different areas. We'll start by getting the first layer of our lighthouse in just for funsies, and then while that first layer is drying, we're gonna come down and do some definition to our water, and then we'll get some grasses in. So my canvas again is dry, so if yours is not, just kind of pay attention to the areas that you're visiting. If you need to hold off on one of them, that is totally fine. Just make sure you're not dragging through any wet paint. So let's go ahead with our medium-sized brush, and I just use that for black, so I want to clean it up pretty thoroughly. The first layer for the lighthouse, we're gonna go ahead actually and, we're gonna sketch it out because that just sounds way easier. So let's go ahead and grab our smallest brush, leave that medium one in your water. The first layer is going to be in white because the stripes are, it's a lot easier if you do the first layer in just solid white, and then you can do black stripes on top. So we're gonna go ahead and just sketch this whole thing out so that we've got the rest of it kind of defined before we jump in with the big portions. So I've got my medium brush, or my smallest brush, wet first, and then I want to make sure it's not dripping wet, but then I'm going to pull in a little bit of white. We're going to go ahead and sketch out just the defining features, and then we'll fill them in with paint. But at least this will get the proportions right. So the lighthouse is just off center. If your landmass went out and you feel like, oh golly, it should just really go in the center, you can put it wherever you want to. I'm gonna go about here. So if you're imagining your canvas cut in thirds, horizontally, vertically, imagine just cut in thirds, whichever way makes sense to you. It's gonna go in this middle third. It's gonna be kind of centered on that left third right over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and give myself kind of the proportions. It's gonna grow out of here, out of the land right here, and then it should go at least a thumb, a thick finger, down from the top should be kind of the biggest point there. So that'll help me to not go too far at least. So I want to start at the top. When you start at the bottom, things start to just they have to grow in proportion. So if we can start at the top, then we can really stop ourselves from just making it too big. So I've got myself, again, a healthy thumb from the top, and then I want to go about 2 fingers down from there, more or less. It is okay if things get a little bit different. About 2 fingers down, I'm going to give myself another tick mark. Sorry if you can't make this out on screen. I'm doing it with white. I'll try to make my dots just a little bit bigger, if you guys can make that out. And then from there, I want it to go down into the ground about halfway. So this bottom portion is what's going to be the big white striped part, and this top is going to be kind of the view tower, the reflective light area. So it's going to be about 2 fingers up top and about 5-ish fingers down from that middle point. If your proportions have to be different to make sense for your painting, it's going to be about 1/3 the top tower and 2/3 the bottom portion, more or less. So whatever you need to do to help yourself sketch, you can always paint these brush marks, especially in white. It's really easy to paint them out if you make mistakes on this. So this is where you can very easily make mistakes and cover it up. So that's why we sketch first. So the thickness of the tower, start with about 2 fingers. So near the bottom, just give yourself 2 fingers width. And you can always make things bigger. Trying to shrink it is a lot harder. So start with 2 fingers, even 1, and you can always grow the proportions outwards. So there, and then what I'm gonna just do is create the bottom of it. Take these lines down to wherever that bottom mark is. This is gonna help me visualize it. The bottom is going to blend in with the land, the black and everything like that, but this will help me with the sketch, just putting a bottom on it. I want it to taper just slightly as it goes inwards. So if it helps you to kind of do 1 finger and dots on either side, that'll help you kind of at least visualize the angle that you want those lines on the side to go. I'm going a little bit thicker than that 1 finger, but if that's where you can start, then you can always just make it wider, but trying to shrink it is a little bit harder because then you have to paint on top of it with some of your cloud colors. Not the end of the world. I've definitely had worse cover-ups. Okie dokie. So now we've got the base. I'm gonna go ahead and do a line across so you guys can see that. You guys keeping up? Am I making words make sense? Things that happen and do? Yes? All right, so a lot of times seeing it is a lot better than whatever comes out of my mouth. So feel free to rewind as much as you need to and just watch it happen. Okay, so what we're gonna be doing now is creating the top tower. So I'm gonna ignore the pole at the top and I'm just gonna kind of create this dome. Now, what we wanna do is start with the area that the light comes through. So what I wanna do is put now more accurately 1 finger's width in the center. And we're gonna try to simplify this just and build it up. So bear with me, that was not centered. That was just a trick if you guys have wet paint and you just put it on there, just take your finger and wipe off any mistakes. So I'm gonna do about the width of 1 finger and go down to the base. This is gonna give I'm not gonna say foundation. It's gonna do a good starting point for the center of the tower. Everything just gets wider on top of this. This is gonna be the light. So the very narrowest part of that top tower area that the light comes out of. So you can take this all the way up to your top dot. That's totally fine. And in the center of this, go ahead and divide a section. If you divide into thirds, section off the middle third, like a ladder. I'm gonna go ahead and fill it in with white, just a thin layer of white. That's gonna be the light, just to make it visually make a little bit more sense. Don't forget to pause, you guys. Take your time. Can everyone see on screen everything is fine? Everything's good? Okay. All right, so now on top of this, I want there to be a dome on the top portion. The whole top third of that shape should now be a dome up to that dot. And for realsies, if you don't have every element of the sketch in your final lighthouse, just no one's gonna know. Put some stripes on top of a white, base, and people will be like, that's a lighthouse, what else would it be? So don't get too caught up in how many little ridges are down below that I'm about to show you. So the dome on the top, I'm just gonna go ahead and fill it in. It's gonna be gray in a second, but I just want you guys to see the shape that we're at this point. And then underneath that, I'm gonna draw in, and again, everything should be a little bit wider now than that light part. I'm gonna do a little platform coming down on the bottom third of this little area. I'm gonna do a platform coming down, and then I'm gonna do a wider one. Now this one I'm not going to bring all the way down. This is gonna be the railing, and then I'm going to bring it down to the top. If that makes sense. It makes more sense if you just zoom into the painting. So I've just created this kind of railing that comes out to the sides, and then I'm just going to leave it like that and have it come down. If the shape comes all the way down to your pillar area, then that's fine. Can everyone see that? Everyone good? More or less? Meh. Okay. Let's go ahead and fill it in and make it look at least like we meant to do what we just did. So what I'm gonna do is grab my medium-sized brush. I'm gonna fill in the bottom portion with white. Don't forget, if you did something a little bit weird, just take your finger and smudge it out, and that'll be the quickest way. So I'm gonna grab pure white, and I wanna fill in the pillar area. This will make it start looking like a lighthouse. And I'll put some stripes on top once it's dry. Bob's your uncle, got yourself a lighthouse. Okay, so I'm just gonna fill this shape in. I'm not gonna go all the way to the bottom because I'm about to turn that black, but I'll get close. We just wanna make sure the proportions were right. And if it didn't dip down into your plant matter that far, then you can just we'll paint it black in a second. You can bring it all down. What I've done is just have a straight line at the bottom here with my white, leave a little area at the bottom that's going to be black. And then just try to get a nice thick coating of white, and to put a layer of white that's pretty thick, it's best to lay your brush down. If you're painting just up and down, just straight like this, it gouges the paint and kind of pulls it off. So if you want to do a thick coating, lay your brush down just like you're applying butter with a butter knife. The flatter the butter knife, the more the paint gets delivered, the less gets scraped off. So just kind of lay it flat. That'll give you a nice coating. And then I'm going to actually use this brush now to do my waves down below. So we have to leave this alone. We'll let it dry for just a second, and we'll come up and do the final details once we get a little bit more detail down below. So what I want to do is just get a little bit of white on my brush, kind of wipe off the extra, and I'm going to start edging out the water. And I want to do this first where it kind of meets the black. And there's going to be a little bit of scrubbing with this too. I don't want it to be a really defined line, so I only have a tiny bit of paint on my brush. You can wipe off some on your paper towel. And then I'm just going along the edge where we don't have the defined line now. And I'm just gonna start messily going in between the sand and the water. And you can have this brush stroke get really thick if you have a lot of things to cover up. And if you need to define your water just a little bit more or differently, it doesn't have to follow the same lines that it had before. You can make these waves a lot juicier and it'll cover up anything that you want to. So I've got just the definition around the edge, and now I want to start kind of coming inwards. So I'm going to start following this really loosely, maybe too much paint. And I'm just going to do that scrubbing along the water line. And then I'll bring some waves back into the ocean itself. Don't forget that vanishing point is about where the lighthouse is, so your brush strokes should start to point either flowing with the water going backwards or pointing towards that vanishing point. I've got a tiny bit of paint on my brush, and I'm just putting as much highlighting as I want to. If you feel like you want just a really more tumultuous water, more white will make it just seem like there's more foam, and that'll give it a little bit more character. So you can take white back as far as you want to, make it look like waves. And while you're at it, if you want to do any bright highlighting to your clouds, you can come back in and you see how much that white is popping because now it's on top. Do the same thing with the dry brushing where you don't have that much paint, you're just kind of scrubbing it on top. And just pick a couple clouds that you feel like need that pop and highlight. Okay. Messy, I love it. All right, so in order to leave that alone, and we have to leave this alone, let's go ahead and do some grass. So we haven't mixed this color yet, we're gonna mix some green. So similarly to how we mixed that warm bluish color to begin with, we're gonna do some white, some blue, and now just let that yellow flow as much as you want. See how quickly that turns it into green. Now, if you don't want a super bright, vibrant green, just add a touch of your red, and that's gonna make it a really, really earthy color. It's almost making brown, a brownish green. So depending on whatever shade you want. I'm still using my medium-sized brush. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna coat the sides and press out the extra green. I'm gonna do 2 shades of green. This will probably be closer to my lighter green. And then I'll darken it up and we'll do a second layer. But I'm gonna squeeze out the extra paint just so my brush goes back to its original size. I'm gonna start my brush strokes with my brush going up and down, just kind of drawing these grass shapes with the edge of my brush. And I'm gonna start my brush strokes down into the black, like I mentioned before. Make sure there's still a little bit of water so it flows easily. Because otherwise the paint will run out, kind of like how we were trying to do the scrubby brush strokes before. We don't want that to happen to our grasses. We want them to be solid paint. So I'm going to start my brush strokes down into the black, and as I'm coming upwards, I'm changing the direction, kind of a quick flick of the wrist, and just change your directions and go down the hillside. Leave some in between, some background showing through in between, and we'll come in with a darker color and fill in those gaps. but we want them over layering each other, filled in, and just changing direction as we go. So I'm gonna go in now and darken this color, more blue, more yellow, and then a touch of red to just kind of neutralize that color and make it a little bit more browny, a little bit more natural. And same thing, but now I'm gonna go ahead and start building on top. My brush strokes again, start down in the black and start brushing upwards. Don't forget that wet brush, otherwise the paint will start to run out, it won't flow. And when your paint's not fluid, it doesn't really flow into the texture of the canvas. We were taking advantage of that earlier, but now it just won't do. We wanna add water to it. Okie dokie, as many layers as you need to. And if you want to switch back to a highlight color, you can do more layering on top. You can see it's getting shorter as it follows the hillside down. I'm gonna go ahead and do a darker color. This is one of those colors that maybe looks a little gross on your palette. Once you get it in there, it works. So I added a tiny bit of black to my color to darken it kind of the final time. And I'm gonna fill that in. And for height, it doesn't really matter how high you get. That'll change how maybe low we're looking at the painting. If we're looking through grasses a little bit more, it just means we're a little bit lower perspective-wise, so you don't have to match a certain height. I'll go in maybe with a brighter color and just add some little pops of highlight back in the foreground. That's gonna give it even more depth by having another color change. It's all about layers and building in this. Trusting that process, letting it happen, letting those mistakes or those weird bits happen, and then just seeing if we can make it all look like we meant to do it in the end. Painting is just faking it until you decide it's finished. Cool? Savvy? So who's ready for layer number 2 of their lighthouse? I get the feeling that I will drag my hand through those grasses and my sleeve within the first like 3 seconds. So I'm gonna just do a quick blow dry just because I know myself. So I'll be back in just a second, I promise. Okay, so I did dry off my canvas. The white on my lighthouse is dry as well, and my grasses will not come back to haunt me even a little bit. So let's go ahead and just get up into our lighthouse and get those annoying bits filled in. And once they have paint in them, they won't look so silly. So let's go ahead and clean off the medium-sized brush. Okay, and then I'm going to mix, first I'm going to start with the pure black for the bottom. I want to fill this in. If you wanted to, You can paint it gray so it sits out just a little bit more, so I'll show you that. So just a little bit of white, mostly black, and you can do the base on the lighthouse so it just looks like it's standing up just a little bit more and it's not just disappearing into your plants. We'll do gold highlights on top though in just a second, so this is not what it'll look like. If you need to go over some of your white with this color, that is chill, do what you need to. All right, and then what I'm gonna do is grab a little bit of black, paint on top, and just do the same kind of swirls that I had done before just to create this whole area. I'll just kind of create those cloudy things in front of that gray just so it doesn't look like it's floating in front. We want it to look like it's actually a part of it. So it'll make it look like it belongs if you put some plant life in front of it. So I've got my smallest brush. Let's go ahead and clean up and fill in the top part with some gray. So it's probably about half black, half white for this gray, more or less. If you want it brighter, make it brighter, more white. The black is more powerful than the white though, so just make sure if you get your pile too tinted, too dark, you start kind of a new pile rather than trying to get that to work. It's just good practice to just kind of start elsewhere or drag out little areas of it and start a new pile rather than trying to make the other one work. Our palettes are so pretty. Look at all those colors. So pretty. We should frame this. What are we doing? All right. So I'm gonna go in and fill in these shapes. I'll start with the dome. Fill that all in. Get rid of all the white. Just get rid of it. And then I'll do a little tower coming up the top. I don't know what it's for. It looks important. Let's just put it in just in case. And then let's go ahead and do a little bit of detailing by wiping off your brush. Don't worry about cleaning it. Pick up just a little bit of black. And our shadows are gonna be on the left-hand side of this whole shape. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start my black on the left-hand side, kind of do a quick outline, wipe off the extra. So I've just outlined the left half of the dome. And then I'm going to swirl little swirls or little quick little brush strokes to pull that color into the wet paint, the wet gray. And as I come over, I'm just doing a light brush stroke, so I'm coming over, the paint's dissipating and mixing in with that gray, and it's gonna create a natural gradients. So that only works if you have a little bit of black, so add little bits and you can build it up, and while it's still wet, it'll blend in. If you wanna do the opposite while it's still wet, you can grab a little bit of white, just do a highlight on the right-hand side, wipe off the extra paint, and then I'm just kind of doing short choppy brush strokes to push the paint into the wet paint. So that's pushing and building up. You can do this blending when it is dry, but it doesn't do as soft of a gradation because it is dry. So you'll have to probably do a second layer completely, which is absolutely fine. That's how we've been painting this whole thing, is we start with an underlayer and then we do all the definition on top. So that actually works great. So you can wait to do the shading later, just get your shapes in and that'll work beautifully. I've picked up my first gray and I'm going to outline the middle area that is the light. I'm just going to go ahead and bring a stripe of that on either side on top of the white. And then I'm going to fill in those weird shapes that we put underneath, all the way down to the white. And I'm gonna do the same thing for shading it. So I'll start with black on the left-hand side. And my brush strokes are gonna get a little bit striper. I'm gonna pull the black across. So I start by outlining. And I'm gonna start pulling to the side. We're shading in a circular object up above, so that's why we're kind of swirling our brush strokes. But up here, I want to push the paint and pull the paint across because it's a horizontal shape. So I want my brush strokes to look like that too. So I start with the darkest, the black on the left-hand side, less paint. You can always build it up. And then I'm going to do striping on the right-hand side, wipe off the extra, and then start pulling it. It's good to pull it to the left. Long brush strokes. And build up the white as much as you need. It'll start to mix in, which is what we want. So if you need to build it up, build it up. Like that. And I'm just gonna take the bottom, kind of the bottom stripe. I'm just gonna highlight a little bit more, make it look like a separate piece, maybe a little getting more highlight or just as a paler piece of metal. It's good to differentiate the shapes and layers by just making one a different shade of gray. Not 50 shades, just maybe 3. Okay. Let's go ahead and take some of that gray. We're gonna add kind of this box down here. So I'm gonna take it down the lighthouse just a little ways, create this box down here. So I've just come down and just in a stripe, but I outlined and went down just a tiny distance, put a little stripe. And then from here downwards, we're gonna do our little spiral stripe. So let's go ahead and sketch those first. So I'm just gonna give you like a second to get that filled in. If you are following along at home, I'll just give you guys a second. I'm gonna clean up my brush to kill time, make it look like I'm doing something important, and then we'll sketch in some stripes. So we did the shading on these guys. We've got the white in the center still for the light. If you feel like it's not bright enough, go ahead and pick up some white, and in the center, kind of swirl in a brighter area where the light's reflecting. That'll give it a nice glow. Down below, we're gonna go ahead and do our sketches for our stripes. So we want them in groups of, we want 3 stripes. So at the top, I'm just gonna do a sketch, just try to make it look even. So on this whole area, I wanna do one at the top, and then I wanna do one about a finger up from the bottom. And this is the right-hand side. And then from here, let's go ahead and find center. This will give us a good beginning. So then on the left-hand side, I want to give myself one at the very bottom. I want to give myself one about finger down from the top, and then find center here. Does that make sense? So we're just doing the mirror image now. We've got one dot at the bottom, one in the center here, and one about a finger down from the top, and first that. And then let's go ahead and just connect those dots here and here. And now all we have to do is thicken them. So we made them somewhat even. Let's go ahead and grab our medium-sized brush now and thicken them. You can continue to sketch them with your smallest brush if you would like to, but I kind of want them to be more even. So I like to just do it with my medium-sized brush, and I can just do one sweep of the brush stroke and do it a little bit quicker, so it feels like it's just a little even, more even when I put the paint on. So I've got some water on my brush still. I'm mixing it with the black, kind of pressing it into the paint, making sure it's stirred in. And then what I'll do is I'll take the side of it, kind of push the paint to the edge of the lighthouse, kind of the width of the brush, more or less. And then about the width of the brush, and I'm just gonna create a stripe going across. Again, it's easier to shrink them, or to grow them than shrink them. So be careful, and just do little bits at a time, and you can grow these stripes. If they don't match perfectly, no one's gonna know. If anyone gets that close to your painting, poke them in the eye. Okay, so generally we want the same width in between the stripes. So if you want to hold your brush up to in between the stripes to know, you can hold your brush up here, and that's about the distance you want them to be, the starting point for them anyway. And then that width, and you can start drag it across. Take your small brush, do those details, any corrections that you need to do. So I'll get my tiny brush and I'll come back in with a little bit of white, and I'm just going to do a stripe on either side to take out any little flicks of color that got a little weird. It's probably best to do this when it's dry, let's be honest. But I live on the edge. So if you guys want to join me there, paint this while it's still wet. Okay, so I got that cleaned up more or less. I'll probably have to go back and get that cleaned up more because I did it while it was still wet. So next, I'm just gonna go add little bits of white where it was a little bit transparent. So just continue with that white around if you need to. But then I'm going to use it to define a little bit more of like the railing up above. So I'm going to outline that area that kind of protruded out. I'm going to do a little bit more highlighting around its perimeter. I'm just going to edge it in white only on the left hand side where the highlight would be coming in. And then as I go to the left, I'm going to do little stripes, little dashes going up and down along that shape to make it look like it is railing. So do any kind of fixing that you want to with these areas. Now that it's a little bit more dry, we can do another layer of gray, or we can brighten them if you want to differentiate those shapes. And then one final thing, I'm gonna take the same small brush and I want to add a little bit of definition to the very bottom of the lighthouse. So I'm just gonna kind of rinse that out real quick. And then I'm gonna pick up my yellow. I'm gonna do a stripe along the gray at the bottom. At the very top of that gray area, I'm just gonna do a stripe of this gold. And then I'm gonna do some vertical brush strokes going down. I'm finally gonna define this shape just a little bit more. So I just did a stripe on top of the gray in gold, and then drag that yellow down. Now again, if you're following along at home, you guys can pause and rewind as much as you need to. You do not have to paint the same pace as I do. Don't feel pressured. Just keep your finger on that space button. Space bar, space, okay. And take your time. This is all about you painting at your own pace that you're enjoying. Do not feel pressured to paint fast, unless you feel like it works for you. I always feel like speed painting helps me to kind of let go a little bit. If you feel like your shrubs and things, trees, plant matter got a little bit dark down here, you got a little bit of yellow on your brush, I'm just gonna go through and pounce on a little bit of gold. Make it look like the sunlight's hitting it just a little bit more. So towards the top of those, I'm just gonna do little swirls of this yellow. Maybe a little bit throughout, just bringing a little pop of color. And if it gets a little weird, smudge it out with your finger. Now, a detail of my own, I like to add birds. It just gives a little bit more life to it, a little bit more movement as things fly through. So my final touch of choice is seagulls. So I'm gonna go in kind of this pocket. It feels like they're kind of flowing in here, the sky. It might be different on yours, so put them wherever it looks natural. And groups of 3 are good. As big as you want them, the bigger they are, the closer they are. So there's no rules for how big or small they need to be. Just a good idea to maybe make them all a little tiny bit different in size. And it's going to be those soft V shapes, just like you would imagine. And I'm just gonna paint those guys in the center there. You can do like odd numbers is the best way. So if you're doing a bunch of them, just make sure there's like groups of 5 or 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Do you want to see more? Do you want to see 7? I'm gonna do 7. Odd numbers are important. Okay. little bit more highlighting if you want to, whatever makes sense for your painting. And that is the last official step. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Don't forget you can get your kit for this whole project, everything delivered right to your home with aprons, paper towels, water cups, everything that you need. It's gonna arrive right to your door. You just go to uncorkedcanvas.com. In our kit section, you'll see that and like 40 other paintings. So you guys go check those out and you can get any kit for any of those projects delivered right to your door. Our studio is opening back up finally. So you guys can see us all in person if you don't want to paint from home. And it'll all happen in February. Hope you guys can join us. But in the meantime, we will see you next week for another live session and we can't wait to see you then. Bye-bye now. Make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss out on the next big thing from Uncorked Canvas.